All righty, everyone, welcome. So we have a few
Welcome
people
back.
returning, getting set up.
Welcome back, folks. Appreciate y'all sticking with us this whole time. Lucky for you, this is the fun one.
Yeah.
We're so glad to have you all here. Thank you for joining. Just in case anyone is new, please do feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box. We will get started here in just a moment. The tech pieces that we always start off with is, and you're probably a pro at this by this point in the conference, but should you have any technological challenges in this session, please do feel free to put a message into the chat box. You can select CVent host and they will receive that message and help out. You are welcome to turn on your camera in this session. You're also welcome to turn on your microphone if you would like to engage in that way. And at the bottom of the screen, there is a smiley face with hello, Sarah, it's so nice to see you. It always warms my heart when I get to see people in the audience because it's like, oh, human to human contact. But down on the bottom, there's a smiley face. It says reactions. That's where you can also communicate things like love what you're saying or, you know, yay, celebratory. The other thing that I would share with you is that we do not anticipate any challenges with technology, but should there be any, please take a moment to take a deep breath, get some water, what have you, and hold tight knowing that we are working in the background to get things taken care of. Yes, and I think that's on my side.
Definitely want to encourage folks to use the reaction functions. Let us know what you're thinking in the chat. If anything resonates with you, let us know. We love to know what is resonating, what is helpful to you, what can we expand on to make this as useful and as beneficial to y'all as possible. And also to my co-presenters, to my co-mod, I can't find my phone, so I will not know what time it is, so feel free to send me messages. Slash, is it time? What time is it?
I think it's 3:02. Yeah, perfect timing. Hey, look at that.
Let's do it. All right, welcome back, Christina. This is session 6. Thank y'all for sticking with us this whole time. It has been beautiful to be in continuous conversation with y'all. So this is the last session of understanding the criminalization of queer BIPOC youth in foster care. As y'all have seen, this is a conversation that can go on for so long, and we hope that we're able to continue having these conversations with you post-conference. With that, I will pass it over to Eliana to do a little bit of housekeeping for us.
So many of you who've been in these sessions with Bella and Ali of the last 2 days know that they are particularly phenomenal presenters, both extremely knowledgeable in the field and just really like big heart, big soul kind of folks. So we are so lucky to be with them, and we are grateful for the funding for this conference, which is through the Mental Health Services Act administered through the California Department of Healthcare Services. While grateful for their funding, what we're about to say does not necessarily represent them or anyone else on the planet other than ourselves. As mentioned, we do not anticipate, next slide please, we do not anticipate any technological challenges, but should there be any, do please hold tight knowing that we're in the background working it out. If we needed to shut this session, we would and send you a new link. But quickly, with the CARE TA Center, we are funded to provide training and technical assistance regarding crisis continuum of care and justice diversion to the 58 MHSA funded behavioral health county departments across the state, including the 2 city jurisdictions. Next slide, please. We are very fortunate to work with 5 partner agencies who are thought leaders. You've seen this slide several times in the last 2 days, so I'm not going to read them off. Next slide, please. And we do a lot of hopefully cool stuff. We do, most importantly, want you to go to our website. Please submit a training and technical assistance request. You might get lucky and end up with some really amazing Bella and Ali kind of people answering your questions, should they be available. I'm not trying to promise their schedules now for anyone, but I'm just saying, really, truly, we are so lucky to work with these 2 thought leaders in the field, and we hope that they will want to work with us again in the future. So do submit a TA request. If they're not available, we do have other TA providers that would love to meet the needs of your agency. Thank you.
Eliana.
Thank you. All right, so this will be our last series of building on queer BIPOC cultural strengths from the individual to communities. So we learned in our last session the last two, 5 of 6 reimbursements thus far. In our last session, we reviewed some of the brain basics on how, so that we can have an understanding of how the brain comes to be and how it responds when it's exposed to new things. So by practicing a new skill, for this sake, is immersing yourself in this culture, creates new connections and pathways in the brain. If we keep practicing these connections will become stronger, which leads to improved performance in this skill. So today we want to immerse you in the queer culture, overall exposing you to the beauty and resilience that exists within our community.
Thank you, Ali. And really, this is the funnest session, so buckle up, buttercups, because we're about to have a good time. And it's also, this session is going to be talking about the eco-cultural strategy. So this is the last reimbursement that we're talking about. And this entire session is going to be a series of examples and ideas around how we can implement eco-cultural strategies, but it is by no means comprehensive. There are so many ways that you can do this for queer youth. So let's get into it. You already know who we are. So again, our group guidelines, we are asking folks to do their part in maintaining a good, inclusive learning space. This is a mutual learning space. So if you have capacity, turn on your videos. Let us know how you're feeling with your functions. Drop things in the chat. Give us those nonverbal affirmations or those nonverbal, feedbacks about the things that are resonating with you or the things that are not. And yeah, we look forward to this session.
All right, so what we will be learning in this session is how to apply the final reimbursement under the person brain model. We'll learn how to use queer histories as resilience building tools for our youth, and we will also have an increased understanding of queer culture and increased competency in working with queer BIPOC youth in foster care. All right, eco-cultural. So as you can see here, we got our little thing that says, may you find love and healing in your chosen family. And we thought that was very relevant because for many trans, non-binary, queer youth, chosen family is often the places that we find and these connections, and we build resiliency. So we can be navigating a multitudes of oppression, adverse experiences. But when we have our chosen community, just like with Paul Baker says, when you have people that show up, you'll be able to get through these things. So the eco-cultural reimbursement honors the fact that there are a variety of cultures and subcultures, as well as an intra-community differences within those cultures that exist and need to be tapped into in order for a youth to feel safe and connected.
Some of those are on Insta. So eco-cultural strategies. So there are, under eco-cultural strategies, a number of ways that you can provide reimbursements for youth that speak to experiences that they may not have had, or connect them with community or popular resources that will help them see themselves represented in ways that are not just representations of pain, right? Youth deserve to see themselves represented in examples of joy and fun and something that goes beyond, right, the pain and the trauma that comes with racialization and queerness sometimes, right? So there are a number of ways that you can do that. These are a couple of the ways that we like to do it. So under representation, pop culture examples, right? So there are so many ways that you can put this into practice. I'm going to offer you a few of the ways that have been impactful for myself as a young queer daughter of migrants. And I say this because so often I felt really culturally disconnected from US-based practices, but being able to get connected to queer culture and community really helped me develop a sense of self that encompassed all of my identities, right? And I was able to get linked up with, queer folks of color, some of who were also children of migrants or migrants themselves, and being able to be part of a community that helped me see myself in these ways saved my life. So when we think about pop culture, well, it's pop culture, historical figures, and education. And so there are a number of ways to do this that kind of incorporate all of these things. So I'm going to talk about a few ways. The first is immersing youth in queer culture and queer cultural histories. We have such a rich history of resistance and of resilience, of survival and of joy, of family making, right? Non-normative family making. And so if we can tap youth into these kind of genealogies that they are already a part of, right? Not by blood, but by experience, we can help them see themselves reflected in their histories, which helps them see themselves in the future. This is a picture of me over a decade ago. This was right after I graduated from my undergrad, and I got a chance to go to New York and go to the Stonewall Inn. And this was such a beautiful moment for me because I had been reading about Stonewall, I had been learning about it in undergrad, and being in this space was such a moment of like reckoning for me, right? It made me feel connected to my queer roots. And one of the things that learning about Stonewall really helped me do was complicate what I knew of Pride, right? We know when we think about Pride, we think of these big parties, right? This rainbow kind of capitalist approach where all of these companies all of a sudden are selling everything in rainbow. And, we see it as a celebration, which we deserve to celebrate, right? But Pride, in the way that it was created, in the way that it was, started really, is born out of resistance, right? It was a riot against police brutality. And so in 1969, a riot against police brutality at this gay bar where trans women often attended because the Stonewall Inn provided cheap drinks. They didn't card underage people. So this was really a place for working class, poor queer folks who were marginalized from mainstream LGBT movements to go and be in community with each other. But it was targeted all the time, right? And there's a number of reasons that it was targeted. First of all, because it was a gay bar, right? So it's a gay bar in Greenwich Village, and it was frequented by trans women of color, low-income queer folks, queer runaways, really a place for people who were marginalized to feel in community and to let their hair down. And at this time, anti-gay laws enforced by New York State liquor authorities made it illegal for gay folks to even congregate, right? To even just be in community together. And especially if there were alcoholic beverages being sold. And so this is what made Stonewall so important, right? It was a place for people who lived outside of the parameters of normativity, right? The parameters of safety and of respectability, and who were shunned by these white, cisgender, gay communities. And as a result of these alcohol laws, the bar itself had been targeted very often by police. But on this night, the night that the Stonewall riots began, our community was fed up. They were tired of it, right? They felt that they deserved a space to be safely with each other, to be able to be in celebration and enjoy with each other. And the women that you see on your screen here, this is an art rendition of Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, who I very much see as my transcestors. So the Stonewall riots officially began on June 28, 1969. Police raided the Stonewall Inn. They targeted trans women of color for violent arrests. They lined them up, and if they were wearing more than 3 clothing items that were intended for the opposite sex, then they were thrown into the paddy wagon, right, the arrest bus. The women that are pictured here, Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, they were trans women who were at the Stonewall Inn that night, and they were targeted by police. And ultimately, these were the frontliners, right? These are the women that put their bodies on the line to start what we know of today as Pride. And so it's said, right, that one of them was the first one they call it the brick heard around the world, right? One of them was the first one to throw the first brick at police, right? Out of anger, out of this frustration, out of this sense of disempowerment. And so often, right, we're in an era of mass protests right now. It's this really beautiful era. Black women in the Black Lives Matter movement. Can y'all hear me?
You cut out for a second, but you're back in.
Sorry about that, y'all. I don't know what happened. But we're in this era of mass protests, right? That has been ushered in by BLM and by the queer women, of the queer Black women specifically, that really kind of brought that movement to the forefront, right? But when we think about these things, so often the conversation is, well, why do they have to get violent, right? Why do these things have to end up in, looting and all of these conversations? And part of that, and one of the quotes that I always go back to is Martin Luther King saying that riots are the language of the people that are not heard. Riots are the language of the oppressed. And that's very much what we can think about, right? When we're thinking about people like Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, they had been experiencing decades, Sylvia Rivera was 17 at the time. So she was a young trans woman, right? Experiencing all of this discrimination, and they were angry at not being able to be in a space safely, angry at being criminalized. They had been arrested several times already. So their anger resulted in the beginning of what we now know as the Stonewall riots. They fought back by throwing bricks at the police, and this fight spilled into the streets where other queer folks joined in. And this is the start of what we know today as the Stonewall riots. And the following year, as celebration marking the anniversary of these riots, that's when we had the first Pride event, right? And so that's why June is seen as Pride Month, because it's in honor of the Stonewall riots. And so when we allow youth to position themselves within these genealogies of resistance, what we're doing is we're showing them there have been people that have existed before you that have been powerful, that have been important, that have had a place within our larger society, but also within their specific communities. And this is Stormy Delavier. She identified as a woman, but she dressed as a man. And so she was also at the Stonewall riot. She was one of the people that was working to keep the trans women safe, right? So ushering them into spaces of safety. She was also this huge kind of figure around Greenwich Village at this time. Created a lot of community for lesbian women, right? For women that identified themselves outside of the bounds of heteronormative, cisgendered ideologies. She played with gender in really beautiful ways. And so again, when we allow youth to learn about these people who have existed before us and have created beautiful lives for themselves, even amongst all of the difficulties that they had to navigate, we allow them to see possibilities for themselves that they may not have known, right? That they may not have even considered for themselves. And one of the things that comes up so often, when we ask youth, what do you want to do with your future? So many of them tell us, right? I don't know. I'm not sure. And part of what we realize is because they haven't seen examples of themselves in the future. They haven't seen what a safe, healthy future filled with joy looks like for them. And so it's hard for them to dream of it, right? They deserve to see examples of themselves living full lives.
So this kind of brings us into some pop culture, right? So we have this image here of RuPaul, because RuPaul has been around for over a decade and its fan base has only continued to build. We have seen the rise of the drag, what are they called? Drag cons that happen where hundreds and hundreds of queer, non-binary trans folks go and just find joy in these, right? And as problematic as RuPaul is, I do want to say that there are some awesome things that go on in this show. So when we think of pop cultures, this is one thing that comes to mind. But this show, throughout the series, it provides insight to the lives of particularly gay men, and trans women have come on the show as well. And now trans man for the first time has come on. And so although this person to me is a little problematic, we can see the power that takes place on the show when you see all of these new competitors coming in and they're competing with one another and they form chosen family through this. And so it's so awesome to watch towards the end when everyone's like competing for this $100,000. In any other show that I've seen where competition is happening for money, there's this sense of rivalry, this like vindictiveness in a way. And the beautiful thing that we see on RuPaul is like, even when they're competing against each other, there is this like love and appreciation and just happiness to be with one another. There's also this really great intervention that I see happen on this show that every time I watch it, I cry. And it's when RuPaul asks the contestants, he brings in a picture of them when they were little. And he says, what would you tell little Ollie if you could tell Ollie something? And that speech that every single contestant has given has brought me to tears, because this is that healing that can happen in spaces when we feel safe. And so you can hear some pretty resilient stories in what they say to each other, right? And they also provide insight. Like these people are saying, look, you're not going to move through the world scene. A lot of people are going to judge you. You're not going to trust yourself. And then they provide solutions of how to overcome that, how to be resilient even in that. And so there's things that we can learn in watching this show, even as problematic as it is.
There are a lot of problems, right? We don't know how we feel about that question being asked on, public television like that, but it's such a powerful question and such a beautiful moment very often.
Yeah, it can be empowering. But yeah, so often when we think of like pop culture, we do forget the history behind drag. And so William Dorsey Swan, what we know today was they identified as drag. That was started by a formerly enslaved Black man known as William Dorsey Swan, aka the Queen. So that would be them right here. They hosted parties for queer Black folks when he was, where he often dressed as drag. The Queen was incarcerated for 10 years for hosting these parties where Black queer folk, especially men, dressed in drag. Legacies of criminalization around queerness, especially when practiced by Black and other communities of color. So this was another group that was highly policed for trying to find moments of community and moments of resilience. So orienting youth to this type of history helps in recognizing the legacy of criminalization as part of this larger system issue, and helps with feelings of isolation. And then Bella, I wasn't sure if there was anything you wanted to add to that.
I always have things to add. I love to talk. I'm just kidding. But, you know, I think that when we think about William Dorsey Swann, one of the important things for us to recognize is exactly what Ali mentioned, right? This history, this genealogy of criminalization that allows you, when they're oriented to it, when they learn about it, to depersonalize that process. Because we've seen, right, when youth are criminalized, when they're disciplined, when they're pathologized, that message becomes internalized. Well, there's something wrong with me. I'm a bad kid, right? And when we are given the kind of context to understand the larger systems that we're a part of and why this criminalization happens, and are given the language and examples of how it's been happening, it fires us up, right? Of course, it creates anger, it creates frustration, but it also gives us a language to understand the things that we've navigated. And also just William Dorsey Swann is one of the first people that created a kind of queer, revolutionary group of resistance fighters, right? And so thinking about these genealogies and being able to orient them in relation to pop culture today helps us see that even beyond, right, like the criminalization and the pain that comes with invalidation and all of these things, queer people have been finding joy, have been figuring out how to practice love with each other, creating spaces for each other. These genealogies have existed for as long as people have existed. And
all right, well, we do have a video here that we're going to show. So before we jump into that, I want to point to this video by Lil Nas X, which is his most recent video, as another example of powerful pop culture. And before we jump into that, I just want to share a statistic. According to the Trevor Project of 2020, 80% of youth said that celebrities who are LGBT positively impacted how they felt about being LGBT. Again, just kind of highlighting that having this representation is it's crucial. So let's go ahead and press play and watch this awesome video. I'm excited.
We also want to say, right, that we know that representation isn't the end all be all of supporting queer BIPOC youth, but we do know that it is incredibly important for building resilience. Oh, these ads. So this is just a very brief example of what
in life.
Montero wants to play entirely for y'all. But this is one of the many examples, right? When we're thinking about queer culture and the way that, queer folks have created representations of themselves using things like cultural iconography, religious iconography in spaces that have been really important to our upbringing, but have also been really exclusionary to our identities. He uses so much religious iconography. And I know, right, I have very religious parents. I know that some folks see this as something that could be sacrilegious, or that could be a kind of insult, right? And so your role also is going to be assessing where the youth is in terms of their relationship with things like this. But for me, seeing images like this and seeing images like the ones that I'll show you was a really powerful moment where I saw myself within cultural iconography and images that I never thought that I would see myself represented in. And so actually this leads us to the next strategy that we'll be talking about.
Yeah, so before you jump into that, Bella, I just wanted to add 2 case studies here in working with LGBT, trans, non-binary youth about religion, right? Is that there is this assumption that, oh, you are a part of this community, then I'm not even going to assess your spiritual religious beliefs. But it is essential that we, like we say, make no assumptions and assess this thoroughly. So I have 2 examples that come to mind. When I was in New Jersey, I had met up with someone who was experiencing what they called culture shock. And I found that they were from, was it Arizona? No, I think it was Arizona.
We're from Utah.
Utah, okay, Utah. And so they had identified as Mormon, and they were also navigating, becoming out as lesbian and accepting their sexuality. And so there was this big piece of, I am a lesbian and I want to be authentic to who I am, but I also have grown up with being a Mormon my whole life and I'm in my 30s. So this was the struggle she had, was like, how do I navigate living in these 2 worlds and how do I make this a space for me? right? So that's one example. And then just 2 weeks ago, I had another youth come in who's had some PTSD, and they're non-binary. And so when, the PTSD, as we were exploring it, kind of tied to a very traumatic loss in the family, to someone that they were very close to. And so I said, wow, for so many years, this person has not been, you have not acknowledged the grief around this person, and it's coming up in these ways. And they had told me, well, this grandmother of mine was very, very religious. And so I do believe that she's in heaven. I do believe in this higher power. I was born Catholic, but I do not practice that anymore because, what the church has said about my gender identity and how it's pushed me out. And so they're 19 and they've pushed away from spirituality and religion, but there was this discussion of this longing to, how can I connect to my grandmother, who I believe has an afterlife, but I don't believe in religion. And so it was a whole session spent on, like, how do we grieve? How do we honor loss? And how can we incorporate some aspects of your religion? And maybe we don't need to take everything from that religion, but what's going to make you feel comfortable? What's going to make you feel like you can honor your grandmother and feel close to her? And so what she decided was, okay, I'm going to make an altar and I'm going to be praying to her and I'm going to give her offerings. I won't go to church. I don't need to talk to my family about it, but this is what I'm going to do to build my spiritual practice. And so it was just like a beautiful moment where she had told me, like, I've been in therapy on this since I was 8, and I have never really touched on, like, this piece needing to be, like, healed through my spiritual and religious practice. So we had to individualize it a little bit. And it was just such a beautiful moment. I mean, she cried at the end and was just like, oh my God, I never thought that this could be possible, to honor my grandmother and utilize some of the strategies that come from, or the ways of grieving and healing through that religion that she was a part of. So again, it just speaks to, like, this is a piece we need to pay attention to.
And as somebody that grew up Catholic, I went to Catholic school for nearly 10 years, and who has been deeply harmed by homophobic church ideologies, by sexist church ideologies, right? That framed young women as, in these really harmful ways a lot of times. This was a really difficult journey for me, right? I now identify as a cultural Catholic, although I'm not, I don't practice within the religion. But there's iconography, there are images that I know that my family has put so much prayer into that still hold a lot of importance for me. So I have an altar to La Virgen. I have an altar to my ancestors, to my recently passed grandmother. And part of this for me, I completely separated from any spiritual practice for like 10 years, from when I was a teenager to my mid to late 20s. Over the past 5 years, I really had to be able to figure out how to develop this spiritual practice in a way that felt right for me, while also honoring the parts of myself that were really harmed by the Catholic Church. And so this is what we mean with assess, right? It's not just, what religious practice are you? Well, what's your experience been like with the church? How are you feeling about it now? Do you feel connected to your spiritual groups? Do you want to feel spiritually connected? And making sure that they see themselves represented in religious practices too. And that's honestly what changed it for me. So this is one of my favorite pieces of art. This is called Lupe and Sirena in Love by Alma Lopez. I found this piece of art when I was in my late teens. And this was such an important piece of cultural production for me. There's so much that's happening here, right? First of all, La Virgen de Guadalupe as this image, as this ultimate mother, right? As the ultimate person that girls should kind of strive to be. La Sirena, who is this cultural icon within this, very popular game called Loteria. I grew up in LA, and the background of this is the LA landscape. The butterfly that you see in the bottom, it's called a viceroy, and it imitates the monarch butterfly, right? So because the monarch butterfly is poisonous, the viceroy isn't, but it mimics it to keep itself safe. And so in the images that I found in this piece of art, I found ways to feel connected to my religion and to my spiritual practices, while also allowing space for my queerness, right? And so for me, it was really through art. So what are the cultural practices and the artists that are practicing within these religious affiliations that you can connect youth to, right? That you can give them access to. This is the fun part, right? This is the part where we get to be like, let's explore art. Like, let's see who's making what, let's make our own art. Maybe, we make a collage that's modeled after these pieces. I found that to be a really, really powerful intervention, is making our own art that's modeled after pieces that we find power in, that we find strength in. Ali, did you want to add anything here?
No. Good.
And I mean, these pieces, right, like cultural practices and religious practices that are queered exist in all cultures, right? We have worked with Muslim youth who have a lot of trouble seeing themselves reflected in within kind of Muslim normative practices. But there's so many queer artists that are creating such amazing, beautiful stuff that we can link them to, right? There are online communities. And of course, there is a conversation here about online safety, but we also have to recognize, right, that when we restrict to the point that youth can't, be engaged in online communities, we're restricting them from being able to connect. We worked with, in the interviews that I did, there was this young girl who one of the clinicians worked with. I'll call her Diana. She was identified as C-sex. She was in a resource home. And one of the rules was that she had to practice safety online, right? She was with the wraparound program, and wraparound program has a no secrets policy. So her specialist found out that she was talking to an older man, identified it as unsafe behavior, and told the rest of the team, including her resource parents. And because the rule in the home was that she had to engage in safe online behavior, she lost access to being online, really, which isolated her from her community and even from her home community. But even more importantly, it isolated her from other queer youth who she had built community with. And so, of course, here, right, there's a conversation about safety, but there's also conversation about the way that we place the onus and the responsibility on the child as opposed to this predatory adult man, right? And so I know that these are really difficult conversations to have, right? But part of it has to be, how do we keep them safe while also not furthering their isolation? And when we tap into these kind of images, we help youth see themselves reflected in practices that they feel connected to, but rejected from, right? And so they don't need to throw away their spiritual practices. We just have to figure out how to take a harm reduction approach and find ways for them to practice their spirituality while also seeing themselves in queer people who also practice this spirituality.
All right, so the next piece, this is me participating in a larger movement. So Lady Dane and Jay Mace, how do you say his name? Mace. Two trans folks began a practice called Transphobia is a Sin, where trans folks and allies uploaded photos of themselves using these hashtags with various messages. So I will go ahead and read mine, but mine says, trans people are divine. Trans people exist because our ancestors existed, whether we grew up in religious households or, as in the case for me, in communities that were and continue to be heavily influenced by religious beliefs that are often transphobic. Religious violence in all forms is detrimental to the well-being of trans people. So me being able, growing up, as I said, I was in foster care, so religion wasn't really a big component of my upbringing. But prior to my mom and dad's divorce, it was. And so as a little kid, it was very ingrained, this Catholic way of thinking. Then my parents divorced. And as I came out at 15, the first thing that was used against me was religious verses, right? Bible verses telling me I'm wrong, I'm going to go to hell, something is inherently wrong with me. And so there was this push away from religion as well. Somewhat like Bella, there's been some work around how do I cultivate healing and spirituality for myself. And so being able to take part in this movement, even if it was virtual, was very empowering for me. Why? Because the family that harmed me with that language they're the ones on my Facebook reading this, right? Reading these messages. And so we can see how just participating in little acts like this that are virtual can empower somebody. Like what I have dealt with growing up around religion, this picture here really was like my little jab back at my family, and so very, very empowering moment.
Yeah. And also, right, connecting them to communities that are larger than themselves. Uploading the photo and the hashtag that was based around this ended up connecting Ali to a whole community of people that were participating in this, right? To trans people that practice religion, that practice spirituality, and that were making a statement, right? Transphobia is a sin. It doesn't belong in our religious and in our spiritual communities. All right. The next strategy that we want to talk about with eco-cultural strategies is political empowerment. So when we think about community organizing, when we think about movements, when we think about advocacy, what all of these things do is create a larger sense of self, right? again, it's so easy to internalize and to personalize the messages that we receive about ourselves. When we place it for youth, when we help them place these messages that they're receiving about themselves within the larger context of systemic racism, systemic homophobia, of transphobia, it helps to depersonalize these things for them. And so when we think about, for example, movements, there we go. I'm bringing us back to Sylvia and to Marcia. We work with so many kids who are criminalized extensively in a lot of ways. And when we think about linking them to the histories that exist, right, part of it is linking them to these histories of women of color, of trans women, of queer people, naming that the police have created harm in their lives and organizing against it, right? So that, again, it depersonalizes it. This isn't your fault. There is a systemic issue that has historically happened, and there are people that have fought it to be able to create the circumstances we're in today, and you can fight it too. You have agency, you have autonomy. And we know, of course, right, that on the individual level, sometimes there's very little that youth can do in terms of protecting them for the systemic violence that comes with racism, transphobia, homophobia, and that exists in, their schools, the juvenile justice systems. Sometimes it's beyond them, but placing them within this genealogy of resistance helps them recognize there are people that have survived this. I can survive this. There are communities that I can tap into. So
yeah. I'll just add this real quick, Bella, real quickly, that, as we were doing this research and preparing for this presentation, right, it came to our attention that 2021 is going to be the year where we make history. And this is not positive history, but this is going to be the year where we have the largest amount of anti-LGBT state legislation being pushed. And we're in 2021 where we're seeing more representation on TV, more acceptance, and yet there's this regression that's happening. There's this political battle that we're back in. It's almost like we're back in this time when the Stonewall was happening. So right now it's a really, really good time to get youth empowered in this political movement, especially as we move in with this year being the most harmful.
Yes, especially thinking about advocacy, right? What are they passionate about? What are the things that they're struggling with? If we connect them to advocacy efforts that are in their area, we're also connecting them to people to like-minded people, right? That are working on the same issues, that can give them a sense of community outside of their homes, outside of schools, which we know can often be spaces that are not healthy for youth. And also linking them to this incredible long history of organizing for each other, of fighting for each other's lives, right? When we think about, this pandemic is something, or pandemics in general, obviously, is something that is really at the forefront of our minds because of COVID, right? We've been navigating this for over a year. People are talking about how it's the worst pandemic. What people are also often forgetting is that we have lived through this already, right? Our ancestors in a number of ways have lived through pandemics, have survived through pandemics, and have created community and family for themselves. And so what the video is about activism during the AIDS epidemic in the 80s, and about what queer community looked like when it was able to unify around this activism, and just the power that came with naming the harms that were happening by the neglect of the state.
Living in New York at that time was like crazy because people are getting sick every day. 3, 4, 5, 6 people that you hear about being sick.
We were very scared that the Reagan administration was going to put people with AIDS in internment camps. And I think that we came close to that in this country.
How deeply are Americans worried about AIDS? A Los Angeles Times poll found that 50% of Americans favor quarantine for AIDS victims. 15% said AIDS victims should be tattooed.
It was about people in power not caring about the lives of people who didn't have power.
Kramer delivered a fiery speech, and I remember he asked like half of the audience to stand up, and he said, "You're all going to be dead in 6 months. Now what are we going to do about it?"
AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. We are a diverse, nonpartisan group of individuals united in anger and committed to direct action to end the AIDS crisis.
Release those drugs! Release those drugs!
When we're activists, when we really act up, we have a big impact, and we get what we're demanding. And when we're silent, we don't.
We'll never be silent again. Act up! We'll never be silent again. Act up!
I really got a sense of community.
I mean, I got the feeling then that people felt that lives depended on them.
Healthcare is the right! Healthcare is the right!
These drug companies are profiteering on our lives, and that we cannot accept that anymore.
See, when we tap into these genealogies of resistance, these genealogies of activism, the way that queer community has been building itself, has been creating spaces of resilience and of community, even in the face of these ridiculous, extremely harmful governmental practices, right? When we think about the way that the AIDS epidemic hit communities of color, part of it was from neglect, right? Not having the resources that they needed in order to be able to learn about how to protect themselves, the resources they needed to be able to access safe sex practices. And so, again, linking youth to these kinds of histories of activism and to these histories of resilience allows them to see themselves in something bigger than themselves.
Living in New York at that time.
Okay, sorry about that.
So other eco-cultural strategies and reimbursements that we can give is looking at building connectedness, right? And this time it's the human experience. The human brain is hardwired for connection. And when we don't feel connection, that's where we see depression, that's where we see suicide, and we see someone follow through with suicide, is that lack of connectedness. And I can tell you, in working in the clinic, every trans non-binary youth that has come into our clinic with suicidal ideation, when I meet with them and we talk, the ultimate underlying message I get is, I don't feel like I have community. I'm alone. I have nobody. And so one of the strategies we can do here is build that connectedness. So one is going to be supportive biofamily, right? Take an assessment. Who in your family is supportive? Who can we have be part of your circle? And ensuring that they're safe, right? Because a lot of trans folks, non-binary folks, queer folks, I think a lot of us do this, is we kind of have some blinders on, right? Like I worked with this transgender youth in New Jersey who, when I asked this question, she said, my mom's my biggest support. And I'm going, well, why are you in a group home? In my mind, right? And I come to find like, oh, dad didn't want me to be trans, mom's allowed him to kick me out. And so in my mind, I'm going, and this is your most supportive person? Yeah, okay, I need to take it. We need to build some chosen family. Right. And so a lot of that was like validating that mom could be this loving, supportive person and be harmful and be invalidating and contribute to the depression and the suicide. So like, let's see who in the group home, who in your workplace, who at school can be safe and validating people. So we'll want to assess biofamily, but keep in mind that a lot of folks tend to minimize, right? And that's the brain's coping mechanism. It's the way for the brain doesn't like to deal with difficult emotion. And so it will fabricate stories. It will blind us to what really needs to be seen. Well, chosen family, right? That's one area we can build that up as clinicians, however, whatever capacity we're working with. And then this kind of just tying back to that community supports. Okay, as we build chosen family, can I get you tapped into the trans group that runs here in Santa Barbara? Can we get you connected to, you know, the LGBT center in LA where they run groups and you can meet other folks? And virtually now, with everything being online, there are so many organizations that are holding virtual space without intake assessments. And right now it's just a more feasible time to access these communities online too. But one of the most visible, sorry, Bella, one of the most visible examples of how queer BIPOC communities have fulfilled the reimbursement for themselves is through ballroom culture. So I will pass it over to Bella. This is her thing.
Oh my gosh, yes. Ballroom culture gives me this feeling that I can't even explain. It's just such a beautiful thing. This is just an example, right, of the way that queer community is able to build chosen family for itself. You may be working with a youth that doesn't have access, right, to a space where, you know, ballroom culture is very, very active. So then your role is going to be, well, who are the people here that I can get them connected to where they can get a sense of chosen family? So ballroom culture, ball culture is an underground scene of dance. It was created by queer, trans, people of color. Well, actually, it was created by William Dorsey Swan, right? The person that we talked about earlier, the first drag queen. They would host balls in their home for other queer Black folks. And these are the balls, these are the parties that were criminalized. And then it got kind of co-opted by cisgender white men who would host these like really lavish balls, and they would have these performances, and whoever could kind of pass more as a woman would win the prizes. But in these spaces, Black and brown trans people, Black and brown drag queens were completely kind of swept off to the side. There would be a couple, you know, in each kind of competition, there would be a couple of Black women, but they would never win. And they were constantly dealing with all of these really racist, really harmful practices. And so what they did was they created a whole culture for themselves, right? They created their own balls in their own spaces that were largely centered around Black and brown trans women, Black and brown youth. And what they did is they revolutionized this kind of way of being in community, where before it was this very kind of, you know, the white men were on this stage, it was very prim, it was very proper. They brought in an energy and a way of being that defied all of that. And so they created what, you know, or based off of, you know, the magazine Vogue, because so many of in the dance Vogue, so many of the poses are, you know, like modeling poses. Y'all don't get me voguing now. But so they created these spaces where through dance, they could express themselves, they could resolve conflict, they could express joy. And these balls became so crucial, especially on the East Coast, for a lot of young queer people who didn't have family that wanted them, right? These became their spaces of chosen family. And so I want to read this really quickly. So this is from a piece that's in The Atlantic, and the person that we see here, they're in a death drop right now. That's that's the dance move that they're doing right now. And you see that they're surrounded by all of these people cheering them on, right? These things that they're doing, the reason that they have their hand out is they're like cheering them on, right? So this person says, for the Black and brown LGBT community, voguing embodies a sense of ownership and pride. It is a piece of culture that they created, imbuing a sense of dignity and respect in a world that doesn't fully embrace their worth. Today, the Kiki balls have become a space for advocacy and self-empowerment. These have really become, and it was started in the 80s, it continued into the 1990s, and it continues today. And of course, the kind of dance that is used has evolved. But what's remained is this idea of having chosen family within these spaces. And so there's this really famous documentary, it's called Paris is Burning. And this is a clip from that documentary about ball culture in the 80s that speaks to chosen families.
A house, let's see if we can put it down sharply. They're families. You can say that, they're families. For a lot of children who don't have families. This is the new meaning of family. The hippies had families, and no one thought nothing about it. It wasn't a question of a man and a woman and children, which we grew up knowing as a family. It's a question of a group of human beings in a mutual bond. A house is a gay street gang. Now, where street gangs get their rewards from street fights, a gay house street fights at a ball. And you street fight at a ball by walking in the category. The houses started because you wanted a name. The people that the houses are named after were ball walkers who became known for winning. Work, Paris, to free, work. After the first few houses were started and named after people who had won trophies, they also would create houses. Like a new group of kids would just create a house. Then they'd work at building its name up, which worked. The House of Extravaganza, the House of Saint Laurent.
Ovenis, Pendarvis,
Adonis.
La Mer.
Pendarvis. Saint Laurent, of course. Dupree.
they treat each other like sisters and sisters or brothers or mothers or, you know, like I say, oh, that's my sister because she's gay too, now I'm gay, and she's a drag queen or whatever.
My name is Angie Extravaganza, and I am the mother of the House of Extravaganza. When there's a ball, I'm always doing something for everybody in my house. I do that one's hair, the other one's makeup, you know, shoes, their accessories. I always offer advice, you know, I mean, as far as what I know and what I've been through in gay life. You know, I ran away from my house when I was 14, and I've learned all sorts of things, good and bad, and how to survive in gay world. You know, it's kind of hard.
I'm Willie Ninja, the mother of the House of Ninja.
Give him what he wants.
I'm the mother of the House of Ninja because they say I'm the best burger out. To be the mother of the house.
Goodness, I wish we had more time so that we can listen to Willie Ninja talk, but we will have to get back to it. Please do, though, if you want to learn more about it, check out Paris is Burning. It's a beautiful documentary, and it's a really, really powerful kind of example of ball culture. But we see, right, the way that this idea of chosen family was so crucial to kids that didn't have access to their own families. And they created it themselves, right? And again, I want to say that, you know, you may be working with a youth that doesn't have access in that way. Who then are the people that they can be in community with to build this sense of chosen family with, right? It's not us. Very often it won't be us because we're in their lives temporarily. So it's our role then to get them connected. And to close this out, I know that we're almost out of time, but this clip is from Legendary, which is in the genealogy of ballroom, right? This is one of the major ways that ballroom has become mainstream. It's on HBO. It's such a beautiful show. Go watch it if you haven't. But this is one of the finale performances from the House of Balenciaga. So I'm going to play the performance and then I'm going to play their closing words because they're so powerful.
Balenciaga! It's the love of ballroom that rescues the abandoned. It's the love that supports those in the darkest times. Love is the message today, tomorrow, 5,000 years from now. So never forget anything is possible when it's done with love.
Her closing, this is just sums up what it is.
The message tonight for our performances, love is the message. We accept all people. We take you in from the abandoned. We pick you up when you're sick. We take care of you and your family when you're in need. That's ballroom.
Well, Balenciagas, that was an amazing.
So when we think about non-normative family building, right, we recognize how crucial it is for us to create these spaces for you to feel connected in these ways. Thank y'all so much for sticking with us through this series. It has been so beautiful to be in community with y'all. Let us know what resonated with you. Let us know if you have any questions. We would love to stay in contact, so reach out to us. Let's keep building a new world.
Yes, and one thing I want to add here, because I know there was a training here on dance and the benefits and how it can heal, right? And so a little bit in some of the presentations, I talked about this thing called bilateral stimulation, where we engage the left and the right and we're moving in rhythm. And so dance is another way that we can tap in that pride, that joy. Does it feel good to dance? And dancing it out is another bilateral stimulation. So I can just want to throw that out there. Dance is such a good regulatory skill.
Yes. And so I think that Eliana may have, and please keep in mind, access on our link tree, we have all kinds of different resources, including a spiritual life map to explore spirituality, the Black Trans Prayer book that was written by 2 Black trans folks. There are so many resources on there, so please be sure to check them out.
Yes. And we'll hand it over to Eliana.
Thank you both so much. I'm handing off a baby right now as we speak, so sorry about that. Thank you, Bella, Ali. Oh my gosh, everybody, please join me. They have lifted the largest lift of the entire conference. Bella and Ali brought us 6 sessions. They are the only presenters who did a whole 6 sessions. Their work is so profound. I saw them at a conference, I don't know, a month ago, and I was like, please, will you come work with us? And there was so much information. We thought we need to put an entire track. And I know from so many people across the country who responded to this track, how important it is to see LGBTQ people represented throughout, not one session, but throughout the entire conference. Really cannot thank you enough, Ali, Bella. This has been really deeply powerful and healing for our communities. Everybody, please do join us in honoring their work by filling out an evaluation form. As we shared this morning, we really do read the eval forms, and we will be bringing Ali and Bella back if they are willing to come back and work with us again. And so your feedback really is very, very helpful.
Yes.
I know that we are at the end of time here, but I just, again, want to thank all of you for showing up. It's hard to do this work, to talk all the time about crisis care and anti-racism. But what you've done here, Ali and Bella, is showing us about how we also bring the joy back in, and that's a survival strategy. And I was just so moved what you said about when we see ourselves in our history, then we can see ourselves into the future. Makes me all verklempt. So thank you all so much.
Eliana, thank you for all of your work. And if y'all want to make us the host, we can, we're happy to stick around a little bit longer to answer questions in case anybody has any. I know that y'all have to hop off though.
Yeah.
I hope everyone will come back and join us for our final closing session, which starts in half an hour on the main platform. So thank you, honoring to all of you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay, we will stay on a few more minutes for any questions.